Marcus here from the Ashland Fly Shop, and today we're going to be tying a shank fly for our fall and winter steelhead fishing that we got going on now and coming up. We're going to be using some of our new materials that we've brought in the last couple weeks here, and these are the barred saddles and barred Schlappen from Montana Fly Company. And we're going to show you today how to use those in an unweighted ostrich fly, kind of pretty similar to a fish taco. So we're going to start on a 40 millimeter articulated Senyo shank. So we're just going to come back towards the back of the fly really consistently here, and you want these thread wraps on top of that last part of the shank to be really secure, holding that shank in place right there. And then we'll just clip this. We're using Vivus's 140 count black thread, which is day in, day out, probably the most common thread that I use. Then for trailing wire, we're actually going to use 30-pound fire line, which you can get in big spools at a lot of outdoor stores, and it ends up being a really cheap option for your trailing wire. I'm going to trail a size 2 owner hook off the back here. Just pull that wire through the hook. As always with all these flies, how far back the hook seats determines the length of your fly. Because this is a little bit longer shank, I'm going to keep that trailer within a couple inches and just help keep this fly in the size range that we like to fish. So that keeps the whole profile of the fly in that 2.5 to 3 inch range, which for us is right in the zone. I'm going to wrap forward with that fire line up the shank, dip it through the eye of the fly, this is a really good reason to be using a shank like this, a shank like this Senyo's 40 millimeter, because you see how big the eye is. So you have all this room when you are wrapping your thread compared to some of the other ones on the market. You really have to work with a smaller area there. So I'll grab that material, fold it back on itself, come all the way to the eye, really consistent wraps, pull tight at the top. As you rack back every 4th, 5th, 6th pull, just get everything really secure in there. Pull it all down. You don't want to break the thread, but you want that to be a nice, consistent tension through the body. And then we're going to start with a little dubbing loop at the back, and I'm going to have a little attractor ball of material off the end of the fly here. That's just going to be Senyo's fusion dubbing, but any bright orange dubbing will work here. You just want a little bit of attraction at the back of the fly. Slide it up, twist it with the OPST dubbing spinner, which happens to be my favorite. Pick it out a little bit before you spin it, and then start to wrap right at the back of the fly and just build a nice little hot head. And I kind of like that everything's picked out there. There's no saddle over it, there's no wire over it, and it just kind of lets it hang back off the end of the fly, kind of fuzzy, just a nice little attractor spot for the fish to look at. And then we are going to tie in this saddle hackle, which is a barred red. The nice thing about these packages, you'll see they're $7, and they got enough for you to tie quite a few flies with, and that's really nice because usually, you used to have to buy the whole neck, and now you can get all these laid out here on the table for the price that you used to get a neck or two for. So you can tie all these different colors, and you're just not as tied down to one color, which is a nice thing. So I'm going to splay all these feathers out and just see how they lay out there. I'm going to grab towards the tip and tie in that tip right above the little attractor spot on the fly. And then I'm going to tie in some ultra wire. This happens to be the large silver, but the large and the medium silver are definitely, let's do that again. And then I'm going to tie in some ultra wire that's going to secure that saddle as we wrap it. I like to wrap the whole wire through the body. Helps lay an even base for the dubbing, but it also gives the fly a little bit more weight, and that is the medium silver ultra wire, which is the most common that I use day in, day out. This dubbing loop, we'll want it to be a little bit bigger, as you see there, and we'll just come forward with our thread depending on how much space we'd like to leave ourselves to finish that fly. So I'm actually going to leave myself a little bit more space just so I'm not running out of room. And then I'll take the ice dub in the peacock black. Anytime you're working with a larger area in your dubbing brush, it kind of helps to get this material a little bit in the shape that it's going to end up being. So you kind of just twist it and lay it down in a line. And that's just going to help you for when you're laying it in your dubbing loop here. And open up that loop, slide it in, and kind of work it up towards the top there. And you just want a nice consistent amount throughout it. If anything, you want more material on the near side towards your hand. Let's do that again. If anything, you want more material towards this near side of your hand so that the body builds bigger as it goes up. But you can also do that just with how quickly you wrap it and how much you put on there. And I'm not going to pick that out because it's going to get laid down a bit with the saddle hackle anyway. We'll just start with nice consistent wraps coming up the body. And see how that body kind of lays down nice and fuzzy. And this is an important thing. That's where I stop my thread, but I have more dubbing on here. I would rather trim off right there than continue to come forward like this. Just because it's in a loop doesn't mean you need to use it all. You just go, and that, you can salvage that dubbing if you want, or you can just clip it off and forget about it. But that's an important thing to know. If you have extra material, don't be afraid to just scrap it, because your fly is going to look that much better because you've got it proportioned the way you want. I'm going to come over that dubbing nice and consistently with this saddle hackle, just making really even wraps. As you come forward, you can kind of pull and push things, but you just want nice consistent wraps right there. And at the top, not a bad idea to just make an extra wrap right at the top. And then tie this guy off. And it just gives that fly that really webby body, where when it slides into that soft water and everything is undulating, that body, that saddle is just gonna pulse through the water. And I like to come through the same direction with my wire, and I'll just wiggle it as I come across. Very consistent wraps, just like that. And what this wiggling does, if you just wrap it, it's going to trap feathers. But as you wiggle, side to side, just like that, those feathers can loosen, and you don't trap as many of them. It's not the worst thing in the world to trap them, but you just want to trap as few as you can. Get a couple good wraps on there. And then I'm going to have another dubbing loop. This one will have our prop, which is going to be Arctic Fox on this fly. And you really want this one to lay down right on top of that last wrap of saddle, or else you'll get this spacing in your fly that kind of doesn't look natural. So Arctic Fox, one of those materials that the more I use it, the more I find out that less is more. If this was a fly for summer fishing, or one that might be used on a Scandi line, something that's really going to make that tough is Arctic fox. I was just out last night throwing a 5-weight rod with a little sink tip, and very similar fly to what I usually use, except I put Arctic fox as the prop where I usually use deer hair, and it was noticeable. The rod did not handle that fly as well because Arctic fox absorbs water as much as anything else out there. So you just want to, I really think, you know, for this type of fly, it's going to be used on a Skagit line most likely, so it's going to handle it. But as you use Arctic fox throughout your summer patterns, I think that's a really important thing to think about. And throughout your winter flies, that you just think of how much of it you're using. Because if you have 2 stations of this much material on a fly, it's really going to soak up some water. And most of the time, when I have trouble with a fly, it's as much because I use too much Arctic fox as it is that I had too big of a dumbbell eye on it or something. And I'm just going to get that right on top of these wraps, like I was saying, of that saddle. And as you work the Arctic fox, you just push everything back. And you see you're just left with this very webby, buggy looking body, which is really nice. And that Arctic fox is going to prop up the next dubbing loop, which is going to hold our ostrich. And this is kind of an important thing to talk about too here. As you see, the fibers of Arctic fox are longer, sticking out through there. If I lay my ostrich right here, or any material, as I spin it, it's going to naturally catch this Arctic fox, these longer fibers. Sometimes that's salvageable, sometimes it's not. So it's worth laying your material a little bit further down, spinning it further out so that it catches less of these long fibers, and you'll just have an easier time there. So we're going to use black ostrich from Montana Fly Company, which if you haven't used this stuff yet, you owe it to yourself to do so, because it's really the best stuff that we've been able to find there. And as you look at the length of the material, you can kind of lay it back. I could tie this whole feather on there if I wanted. I'm going to cut it just a little bit short. And I like to, with one thing about having thin ostrich is that if you're just doing an ostrich fly, you're going to have to use a little bit more of it than you might with a thicker ostrich. So I'm going to get, I'm going to try to find just the perfect amount for this fly. And I'm going to come in, cut it very evenly, as even as I can. But it's going to shift around, you know, even just that little hand switch, it's going to shift around a little bit. For me, tying flies, I need to be able to do it in somewhat of a quick fashion. You could lay these out on the table, you could straighten up all the edges, make sure they're the same length, but for me, as long as those ends are relatively similar, that's fine. I'm ready to spin it. And like I said, I'm going to lay it in just at the point where I feel comfortable laying it in there. And once it's in there, you can grab it, kind of work with these feathers a little bit if they cooperate. And let's see if I can trim those stems there. This is something worth talking about too. They will, because it's such a fine material, it can be really tough to get it to lay in the loop the way that you want. But as you spin it, because of the tension, and you see it's grabbing this Arctic fox already, I'm just going to pick all that out there. Because of the tension, even if they start sideways like the way that they did, they will still splay out nice and evenly straight out the way they are now. And you just give it however tightly you want them in that loop. You just keep spinning and spinning, but it is worth keeping that away from your Arctic fox. It does make a little more thread buildup, but it's kind of the cost of keeping that Arctic fox out there. Every time I wrap this, I'm gonna pick out some of these feathers if they're stuck in here, kind of pull back the Arctic fox. See, like this, you just kind of work these feathers. You don't want any of them detached, because as you lay them in your loop, you're really deciding the profile of your fly. And if half of the ones that you wrap are trapped under your wraps, you've kind of defeated the purpose of deciding how much you want in there from the beginning. And that got a little stemmier than I usually like towards the top. And this looks like it's a winter fly, just because of the size of those ostrich pearls off there. It's a little sparse on the top, and I'm not going to take the time to rewrap. I'm just going to grab 4 or 5 individual feathers and just lay them across the top, just to fill out the top of the fly. So this gives a nice, big, really very wiggly profile. There's a couple things you can do in a fly like this to spruce it up so that it's not just a big, big spider-looking thing of ostrich going through the water column. One popular thing is just a little bit of Lady Amherst, which has been a thing that's been pretty tough for us to find. But I'll just peel a little bit. And with my barring, like Amherst, I kind of just like it to lay down on the sides of the fly. I just feel like that's an area where the fish are going to be seeing the sides of the fly quite a bit. And I do like a little bit of contrast coming down the sides. And that'll just help spice it up a little bit. We might as well make that even all the way around. Amherst is another material where less seems to be more, because it tends to really get attracted to itself. And what I mean by that is it kind of just sticks together. So the less of it you have on there, the more it gives it that light, wispy look. Those guys. You just want to be cautious as you're wrapping everything back that you kind of keep the pressure off of that ostrich, at least a little bit, just so it helps give it that nice big profile there. And on top of that, we're going to use 2 more of the red saddles, and these will just help give a little barring through the top of the fly, however you'd like to lay them. I like mine, after I trim these back, I like them to be married, and I like them to go at least to the eye of the hook, but even somewhere around the bend of the hook is personally how I like them. So you're just gonna get these tips really close to each other, whatever that length is that you need for the fly. You'll just start peeling back both feathers there. And no need to peel them all the way to the back of the feather. You can just clip them just so you have a nice place to tie onto. And I'm gonna pull these back a little bit just so it looks like a little bit smaller profile here. And we can tie them in one at a time. For whatever reason, I always start with the one that goes to the right. And you'll lay it, I'll do this from this view so you can see it, you'll lay it at a side angle, get it to lay as flat as you can, give some nice consistent wraps, and then grab that stem, fold it back on itself, and it'll just give it that, you'll see when I flip the fly back over, it'll give that feather kind of an upright look, that it's not going to keep that look in the water because of the tension, but it'll at least help. So that's the top of the fly profile, and as I flip it over, you see that both of those are hanging at a similar length. Both of them are coming off at a similar angle off the shape in a big wing. And this fly is starting to look really nice the longer the longer I work with it here. Gets me excited for gravel bar fishing close to the ocean in the winter. It could be done there. So we're going to keep going with this fly. Sometimes you just don't know when to stop. And sometimes you regret keeping going. But we're going to keep going. We're going to tie in one of the barred Schlappen in red, just to give it that extra Darth Vader look here. And we'll clip. Sometimes the fuzz is fun to use, but we're not going to use any of it today. So we'll peel away all that fuzz. I'm known for really liking oversized collars. So you can work with the top of the feather if you want a smaller collar or it's a smaller profile, but with this fly, for me, a fly of this size is really going to be a winter fly. So I'm going to use some of this larger, webbier material towards the back. And how much you use is kind of personal preference. A lot of people will peel a stem from either side and just use one half of the stem because they like the way that wraps. For me, I just like about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of collar on a fly like this. Once you do that first soft wrap, place your finger on the stem to really lay it down. Get another couple really solid wraps because there's really nothing that kind of bums me out more than when I'm wrapping these and the stem pulls through the thread. So I'll just come in, grab the stem, pull it up straight, pull that material straight out, and start to wrap. And each wrap, just like you do with your off. So this stem pulled out. And that is something, this stem pulled out, and that's something that happens sometimes. And it's worth unwrapping your thread where it happened. And you just want to, because you see how after I wrapped in these stems, I came forward towards the eye. Those thread wraps, I think when you're building ahead, you want to come back just to that thread wrap there, if you saw that. It's the first wrap that comes directly back to the base of that feather. Because as I tied this on and wrapped it forward, I came forward towards the eye. I could wrap back and forward, but it builds a bulk in the head that you don't really want. If you ever have the stem rip out, The easiest thing I've found is just keeping it in your hackle pliers, doing one really soft wrap, and this time you know that you need a harder wrap on there than you did before, and obviously you just wrap it a bit softer than the time before. You pull all these materials, get them to lay back on each other. And that collar is splaying out a little bit more than I like to see. So I'm going to pull this stem out of there, tie it off, grab all the feathers, and do a couple wraps on top of those feathers, and it's going to get that collar to just sit down the way I like to see. And this head is a little bit bigger than I normally try to do, but that's not a problem. I'm going to grab all those feathers again, and then I'm just going to neaten up the head a little bit. Tie down all these loose ends, fill in the space where you can see your stem sticking out there. You just want a nice, consistent, even looking head. I try to do it the shape. No matter the color, I try to make my heads pretty similar to how you'd see a cone head on a fly. Just kind of that cone shape coming down there. And then we're going to whip finish, which I like to do 2 of them. And you always whip finish in the shape of that cone that you're trying to build too. And then we're going to put on some loon hard head, and we're going to call it a day. Just a nice even finish with this glue. I'll do a little bit more. And if you have an uneven amount of thread in the head, this stuff is thick enough where you can kind of fill in those gaps in your thread and get it looking whatever shape you like to see. I'm actually, not that I need to, but just because I'm really particular about my flies. Pull these stems up a little bit just to give it that look. So this is a fly tied here with our new barred saddle from Montana Fly Company and the barred Schlappen on the collar. Unweighted, pretty large profile, red and black. A color combo I really like in low and clear water, but folks have confidence in it in all different colors of water. Thank you for tuning in.